The sound of metal hitting concrete echoed through the Fort Braxton shooting range as my brother Marcus tossed his instructor badge onto the table in front of me. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at the electronic scoreboard that displayed a number nobody had seen in 20 years, 598 out of 600. Perfect grouping, perfect form, perfect execution. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. How? Was all he managed to whisper. 3 months earlier, that same brother had stood in our childhood kitchen, pointing his finger at me like a loaded weapon, telling everyone at our family barbecue that I was a disgrace to the Sullivan name. That I'd never make it past basic training, that some people just aren't cut out to be soldiers. He was wrong, dead wrong. Growing up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, the Sullivan household revolved around one thing: military excellence. Our father, Colonel James Sullivan, had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before retiring to teach military strategy at the local community college. Our walls were covered with commendations, medals, and photographs of 3 generations of Sullivan men in uniform. The expectation wasn't whether we'd serve, it was which branch we'd choose and how quickly we'd rise through the ranks. Marcus had always been the golden child, 6 feet 2 inches of pure determination. He'd dominated every sport in high school, graduated valedictorian, and earned a full ROTC scholarship to West Point. By 25, he was already an instructor at one of the military's most prestigious training facilities, known for turning out elite marksmen and tactical specialists. His students called him Bullseye Sullivan, and his reputation for precision shooting was legendary throughout the base. Then there was me, Tyler Sullivan, the younger brother who couldn't seem to hit the broadside of a barn. My problems started early. While Marcus was collecting trophies, I was collecting bruises from failed attempts at every sport imaginable. Football, too small. Basketball, couldn't make a free throw to save my life. Track and field, I once tripped during a 100-meter dash and took out 2 other runners. The family joke was that I had inherited all the Sullivan determination, but none of the coordination to back it up. The real turning point came during my senior year of high school. Our father had arranged for both of us to spend a weekend at a local shooting range, a Sullivan family tradition before any major life decisions. Marcus, home from West Point for spring break, stepped up to the firing line with the confidence of someone who'd never missed a target that mattered. His shots rang out in perfect rhythm, bang, 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 each bullet finding its mark with mechanical precision. "Your turn, little brother," he said, stepping back with that trademark smirk that had been irritating me since childhood. I picked up the rifle, feeling its weight in my hands. The metal was cold, unfamiliar. I'd held hunting rifles before during family trips, but this was different. This was a test, and everyone knew it. My father stood behind me, arms crossed, watching with the intensity of a drill sergeant. Marcus leaned against the wall, already confident in the outcome. The first shot went wide. Not just wide, it missed the entire target and embedded itself in the wooden frame. A few people at nearby lanes turned to look. Marcus let out a snort of laughter. "Focus, son," my father said quietly, but I could hear the disappointment creeping into his voice. The second shot was worse. Somehow, I managed to hit the target to the left of mine, earning an angry glare from the stranger using that lane. My hands were shaking now, sweat making the grip slippery despite the air conditioning. By the time I'd emptied the magazine, I'd hit my actual target exactly 3 times, and none of those hits were anywhere near the center ring. Marcus had scored a 285 out of 300. I'd managed a 47. "Maybe the military isn't for everyone," Marcus said as we packed up our gear. He said it quietly, almost gently, but the words hit harder than any insult could have. "There's no shame in finding a different path, Tyler. College, maybe a trade school. Not everyone needs to wear a uniform." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Marcus and our father discuss my situation in the kitchen below. Their voices were low, but in a house that small, walls were just suggestions. "He's got heart," I heard my father say. "But heart isn't enough if you can't hit what you're aiming at." "Dad, he's dangerous to himself and everyone around him," Marcus replied. "Did you see him today? He couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat. What happens when he's in a real situation?" What happens when lives depend on his accuracy? So what do you suggest? I suggest we stop pushing him towards something he's clearly not meant for. Tyler's got other talents. He's smart, he's good with people. There are plenty of ways to serve your country that don't involve carrying a weapon. The conversation continued, but I'd heard enough. In their minds, I was already a failure, a disappointment to a family legacy that stretched back to World War II. The worst part was that I couldn't even argue with their assessment. The evidence was right there on that target, or rather scattered everywhere except where it should have been. 2 weeks later, against everyone's advice, I enlisted in the Army. The decision shocked everyone, including myself. But something about that conversation, about being written off before I'd even tried, lit a fire in me that I didn't know existed. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe I would wash out of basic training. Maybe I would be a danger to myself and others. But I'd be damned if I was going to let fear of failure stop me from even attempting to follow in my family's footsteps. Basic training at Fort Leonard Wood was everything I'd feared and worse. While other recruits seemed to adapt naturally to military life, I struggled with everything from making my bunk to assembling my rifle. The drill sergeants noticed my difficulties immediately, and I became their favorite target for creative criticism. "Sullivan," Drill Sergeant Morrison would bark across the training ground. "You shoot like you're trying to scare the enemy to death with noise." My first qualifying test was a disaster. Out of 40 rounds, I managed to hit the target 23 times, with only 6 shots in the qualifying zones. The minimum passing score required 36 hits, with at least 24 in the qualifying zones. I wasn't even close. "You've got 2 more chances, soldier," Sergeant Morrison told me afterward. "But between you and me, you might want to start thinking about a different career path. The Army needs clerks and cooks, too." The second attempt was marginally better, 28 hits, but still only 8 in the qualifying zones. Not even close to passing. As I walked back from the firing line, I could see the other recruits whispering, some shaking their heads sympathetically. Word spread quickly in basic training, and by dinner that night, everyone knew that Tyler Sullivan was about to wash out. That evening, I called home from the payphone outside the barracks. My father answered on the 3rd ring. "How's training going, son?" I wanted to lie, to tell him everything was fine, that I was excelling just like Marcus had. Instead, I found myself telling him about the failed qualifying tests, about the concerned looks from the drill sergeants, about the very real possibility that I'd be heading home within the week. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like hours. "Tyler," he finally said, and his voice was gentler than I'd heard it in years. "There's no shame in admitting when something isn't right for you. Your mother and I just want you to be safe and happy. If the military isn't your path—" "It is my path," I interrupted, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "I know I'm not good at this yet, but I'm not giving up. I've got one more chance to qualify, and I'm going to make it count." Another pause. "Son, sometimes wanting something isn't enough. Sometimes we have to accept our limitations." After I hung up, I sat on the steps outside the barracks, watching the sun set over the Missouri hills. Tomorrow was my final qualifying attempt. If I failed, I'd be processed out of the Army and sent home to face a family that had been right about me all along. Marcus would get his confirmation that not all Sullivans were meant to be soldiers. But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was stubborn pride, or maybe it was desperation, but I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to accept failure. Not yet. Not when I still had 18 hours to figure out what I'd been doing wrong. That night, while my fellow recruits slept, I snuck out to the training materials room and borrowed every manual on marksmanship I could find. I had one last chance to prove that Tyler Sullivan belonged in uniform, and I wasn't going to waste it. The training materials room smelled like old paper and gun oil. Under the dim emergency lighting, I spread out diagrams of shooting stances, breathing techniques, and sight alignment across a metal table. Every manual said the same thing: fundamentals, fundamentals, fundamentals. But knowing the theory and executing it were 2 completely different battles. I started with my grip. According to the technical manual, 60% of shooting accuracy came from how you held the weapon. I'd been gripping the rifle like I was trying to strangle it, white-knuckling the stock until my hands cramped. The diagrams showed a firm but relaxed hold, like shaking hands with an old friend. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Next came my stance. I'd been standing like I was bracing for an earthquake, feet spread wide, leaning back as if the rifle might knock me over. The manual showed a balanced, athletic position, slightly forward, feet shoulder-width apart, weight evenly distributed. It looked natural on paper but felt completely foreign when I tried it. The breathing section caught my attention because it discussed something I'd never considered: the natural respiratory pause. Everyone breathes in cycles, and there's a moment between exhaling and inhaling where your body is completely still. That's when you squeeze the trigger. I'd been holding my breath until my vision blurred, then jerking the trigger in panic before I passed out. But the real revelation came in a chapter about trigger control. The author, a Marine Corps sniper instructor, wrote about something called trigger memory. The idea that your finger could learn the exact pressure needed to break a shot cleanly. He described it like learning to play piano. At first, every note requires conscious thought, but eventually, your fingers know where to go without your brain's input. By 0300 hours, I had absorbed everything I could from the manuals, but reading about shooting and actually doing it were worlds apart. I needed practice, and I needed it without anyone watching me fail again. The ammunition storage facility was locked, but the dummy training rounds were kept in a separate cabinet that used a standard military lock, a combination I'd memorized during our first week when Sergeant Morrison had opened it in front of the entire platoon. The man was precise about everything except operational security. I slipped into the empty shooting range at 0400, carrying a rifle loaded with dummy rounds. The electronic targets were powered down, but the manual backup targets were still in place. I had 2 hours before morning formation, 2 hours to reprogram muscle memory that had been developed incorrectly over months of training. The first hour was frustrating. Even with dummy rounds, I could tell I was still making the same mistakes. My hands would tense up the moment I acquired a sight picture. My breathing became shallow and rapid. Every shot felt rushed, forced, like I was fighting the weapon instead of working with it. Then I remembered something from one of the manuals, a visualization technique used by Olympic shooters. Instead of focusing on hitting the target, focus on executing the fundamentals perfectly. The target becomes secondary to the process. I closed my eyes and went through the sequence step by step. Grip, firm but relaxed, like holding a bird that you don't want to crush but can't let escape. Stance, balanced, natural, like standing in line at the grocery store. Sight alignment. Front sight post centered in the rear sight notch, target blurred behind it. Breathing, inhale, exhale halfway, pause. Trigger press, straight back, steady pressure, let the shot surprise you. When I opened my eyes and tried the sequence with the rifle, something clicked. The weapon felt different in my hands, less like a foreign object and more like an extension of my body. The dummy round clicked home with a satisfying snap that told me the trigger break had been clean. I spent the remaining hour repeating the sequence until it became automatic. Grip, stance, sight alignment, breathing, trigger press. Each repetition felt smoother than the last. By the time I heard voices from the barracks area, signaling the start of another training day, I felt something I hadn't experienced since arriving at Fort Leonard Wood: confidence. My final qualifying test was scheduled for 1,400 hours, right after combat training exercises. The entire platoon would be watching, along with several drill sergeants and the company commander, Captain Rodriguez, who had a reputation for personally processing out soldiers who couldn't meet basic standards. During morning PT, I kept my mouth shut about my midnight study session. The other recruits were supportive but resigned. Everyone knew this was likely my last day in uniform. Even Davis, my bunkmate, who'd been struggling with his own challenges, patted me on the shoulder during breakfast. "Whatever happens today, you gave it your best shot," he said. "That's more than most people can say." The morning dragged by with agonizing slowness. Hand-to-hand combat training, where I actually performed well for once. Field stripping and reassembly of weapons, which I completed in record time thanks to my late-night manual reading. map reading, and land navigation, subjects that had always come naturally to me. But through it all, my mind kept drifting to that firing line. 40 rounds. 24 qualifying hits minimum. 36 total hits to pass. Numbers that had seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier, but now felt achievable. At 13:30, Sergeant Morrison called me aside. "Sullivan, I want you to know that regardless of what happens today, you've shown more determination than most recruits I've trained. Sometimes that matters more than natural ability." He paused, studying my face. "But determination alone won't guide those bullets to the target. Are you ready for this?" "Yes, Sergeant, I'm ready." The walk to the firing line felt like a funeral march. My fellow recruits lined up behind the safety barrier, some offering encouraging nods, others looking like they were attending a wake. Captain Rodriguez stood with his clipboard, ready to document my final failure and begin the paperwork to send me home. I drew my weapon and ammunition from the armorer, checking the rifle for any obvious defects. Everything looked good. The familiar weight of the M16 in my hands no longer felt awkward or threatening. Thanks to my midnight practice session, it felt like coming home. At the firing line, I assumed my position at lane 7, the same lane where I'd failed twice before. The target seemed impossibly small at 200 meters, a black silhouette against the white backing that might as well have been a postage stamp. "Shooters, you have 40 rounds to qualify," the range safety officer announced through his megaphone. "Make them count. Load and lock." I inserted my magazine with steady hands. Around me, I could hear the metallic sounds of other shooters preparing their weapons, but it felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater. My entire world had narrowed to the rifle in my hands and the target downrange. Take aim and fire when ready. This was it. Everything I'd worked for, everything my family expected, everything I'd dreamed about since childhood, it all came down to the next few minutes. I raised the rifle, settling into the shooting position I'd practiced in darkness just hours before. The fundamental sequence began automatically, like a computer program running in the background of my mind. Grip, stance, sight alignment, breathing. The front sight post found its home in the rear sight notch, crisp and clear against the blurred target beyond. I began my breathing cycle, feeling my heart rate slow as oxygen filled my lungs. Inhale, exhale halfway, natural respiratory pause. My finger found the trigger, applying pressure straight back toward my shoulder. Steady, consistent, letting the shot break naturally instead of forcing it. The rifle fired. For the first time in my military career, I absolutely knew that the shot had been perfect. The electronic scoring system registered the hit before I even lowered my rifle. A small green light appeared on the monitor at my station, followed by a number that made my heart skip. 9.7 out of 10. Inner ring. Almost a perfect bullseye. I blinked hard, certain I was hallucinating. In dozens of practice sessions, I'd never scored higher than a 6. But there it was, glowing green on the digital display. Impossible to deny or dismiss. Behind me, I heard Sergeant Morrison's voice, unusually quiet. "Well, I'll be damned." The second shot felt even better than the first. The fundamental sequence had become automatic. My body knew exactly what to do without conscious input from my panicking brain. The rifle settled naturally into position, my breathing slowed, and the trigger broke clean and smooth. Another green light. 9.8. By the fifth shot, a crowd had begun gathering behind the safety line. Word spreads fast on a military base, especially when something impossible is happening. Recruits from other platoons started showing up, drawn by whispered reports that Tyler Sullivan, the same guy who couldn't hit a barn from the inside, was shooting like Annie Oakley. Shot number 10, 10.0, perfect score. Shot number 15, 9.9. Shot number 20, another perfect 10. The silence behind me was deafening. Even the drill sergeants had stopped their usual commentary, watching in stunned silence as the recruit they'd written off 3 months ago methodically destroyed every preconception they'd held about his abilities. Captain Rodriguez approached the firing line, his clipboard forgotten in his hand. "What's his current total?" he asked the range safety officer. 38 out of 40 shots fired, sir. Average score of 9.7. That's expert marksman level. What's the qualification requirement again? 24 qualifying hits out of 40, sir. He passed that threshold 15 shots ago. When the 40th and final round left my rifle, I knew before the scoring system registered it that the shot was perfect. The sight picture had been flawless. The trigger, break clean. The follow-through textbook. The electronic display confirmed what my body already knew. 10.0. Final score, 387 out of 400. Expert marksman qualification on the first try. The range fell completely silent. 40 recruits, 6 drill sergeants, 2 officers, and a handful of base personnel all stared at the scoreboard like it might change if they looked hard enough. Someone had to say something eventually, but nobody seemed to know what. Finally, Sergeant Morrison broke the silence. "Sullivan, step forward." I approached him on unsteady legs, still carrying my rifle, still not entirely convinced this wasn't an elaborate dream. In 15 years of training recruits, I have never, and I mean never, seen improvement like that. He looked at me like I was some kind of alien species. 3 days ago, you couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. Today, you shoot better than most of my drill sergeants. What changed? The honest answer was complicated. It wasn't just the midnight study session or the extra practice with dummy rounds. Something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with the weapon, with the process of shooting, with my own capabilities. But standing there in front of everyone, I kept it simple. I stopped trying so hard to succeed and started focusing on not making mistakes. He nodded slowly, like that made perfect sense. "Expert marksman badge, Sullivan. Congratulations, you've earned it." The celebration that night in the barracks was unlike anything I'd experienced. Guys who'd barely spoken to me during our first month of training suddenly wanted to know my secret. Davis bought me 3 sodas from the vending machine with his own money, declaring it the best investment he'd ever made. Even recruits from other platoons stopped by to shake my hand. But the moment that mattered most came during evening chow, when I finally worked up the courage to call home. My father answered on the second ring, and I could hear the television in the background, the evening news, same as always. "Tyler, how did the test go, son?" "I qualified, Dad." A pause. "You passed? That's wonderful. Your mother will be so relieved. We were worried." "I didn't just pass," I interrupted. "I scored 387 out of 400. Expert marksman qualification." The silence stretched so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. "Tyler, are you certain? That's an exceptional score." "I'm certain, Dad. The drill sergeant said it was the best shooting he'd seen from a recruit in 15 years. Another pause, then I heard him calling to my mother in the background. "Patricia, Tyler qualified expert marksman. Expert, not just a sharpshooter." Quote. When he came back to the phone, his voice was different. Warmer, prouder. "Son, I owe you an apology. I doubted you, and I was wrong. Your grandfather would be proud. He was an expert marksman in Korea. It runs in the family, apparently." We talked for another 20 minutes, and for the first time since enlisting, I felt like I truly belonged in the Sullivan military tradition. But there was one conversation I was avoiding. One person who needed to hear this news directly from me. Marcus was stationed at Fort Braxton, North Carolina, about 800 miles from Fort Leonard Wood. According to family updates, he'd been promoted to senior instructor and was running advanced marksmanship programs for special operations candidates. His own reputation had only grown since I'd left for basic training. Word was that he'd set several range records and was being considered for assignment to the Army's elite shooting teams. I didn't call him that night, or the next week, or even the week after that. The rest of basic training passed in a blur of confidence and competence. My shooting scores remained consistently high, but more importantly, my overall performance improved across every category. Physical training became easier when I wasn't dreading the next trip to the firing range. Tactical exercises made more sense when I had confidence in my ability to engage targets effectively. Leadership opportunities opened up when the drill sergeant started viewing me as a capable soldier rather than a liability. Graduation day arrived with typical military efficiency. Families gathered in the base auditorium while we stood in formation, crisp and professional in our dress uniforms. I spotted my parents in the third row, both beaming with pride that seemed genuine for the first time in years. But Marcus wasn't there. He'd sent his regrets. Training exercises at Fort Braxton required his presence. Part of me was relieved. Our conversation about my transformation could wait until I was ready for it. After graduation, I received orders for advanced individual training at Fort Gordon, Georgia, followed by assignment to Fort Braxton for specialized marksmanship instruction. The same base where Marcus was stationed. The same base where I'd finally have to prove that Tyler Sullivan wasn't the failure everyone had expected him to be. 3 weeks later, I arrived at Fort Braxton carrying my duffel bag, my expert marksman badge, and a confidence that still felt new and fragile. The base was larger than Fort Leonard Wood, more professional, more intense. This was where elite soldiers came to become exceptional soldiers. I checked into my barracks, unpacked my gear, and spent the evening reviewing my orders. My first assignment was with the Advanced Marksmanship Unit, under the supervision of Senior Instructor Marcus Sullivan. My brother still didn't know I was coming. According to the family grapevine, he believed I'd washed out of basic training and was working some civilian job back in Iowa. The Army personnel system had processed my transfer without requiring family notification, and I'd asked our parents to keep my success quiet until I could tell Marcus myself. Tomorrow morning, I'd walk into his training facility, stand at attention in front of his desk, and watch his face when he realized that his failed soldier little brother was now assigned to his unit. The thought kept me awake most of the night, but not from anxiety. For the first time in my life, I was looking forward to surprising Marcus Sullivan. The Advanced Marksmanship Unit occupied Building 847, a modern facility that looked more like a corporate training center than a military installation. Glass walls showcased high-tech simulators, precision rifles mounted in climate-controlled cases, and digital displays showing real-time ballistic data. This wasn't basic training anymore. This was where the Army's best shooters came to become legends. I stood outside Marcus's office at 07:30 sharp, my uniform pressed to perfection, my service record folder tucked under my arm. Through the glass door, I could see him hunched over paperwork, his instructor badge catching the morning light. He looked older than I remembered, more serious, with the bearing of someone who'd earned every stripe on his sleeve. His nameplate read, SSG Marcus Sullivan, Senior Marksmanship Instructor. Below it, a smaller plaque displayed his credentials. Expert Marksman, Distinguished Rifle Badge, Army Shooting Team Member. The wall behind his desk was covered with photographs of him, with various military dignitaries, training certificates, and marksmanship awards. I knocked twice. Enter. Marcus looked up from his paperwork, and I watched his expression cycle through confusion, recognition, and complete shock in the span of 3 seconds. His pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto his desk. Tyler? He stood up slowly, like he was seeing a ghost. What? What are you doing here? Quote, reporting for duty, Sergeant Sullivan. I handed him my orders, maintaining perfect military bearing despite the family relationship. Private First Class Tyler Sullivan, assigned to the Advanced Marksmanship Unit effective immediately. He took the paperwork with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the official Army letterhead as if searching for evidence of forgery. This says you completed basic training at Fort Leonard Wood. With honors. He looked up at me, bewildered. Mom and Dad said you dropped out. They said you were working at a hardware store back home. I asked them not to tell you. I wanted to surprise you myself. Marcus sank back into his chair, still staring at the transfer orders. Basic training? You actually completed basic training. He shook his head slowly. Tyler, when you left for Missouri, I gave you maybe a 10% chance of making it through the first month. Your shooting was terrible. I know, it got better. Better how? You couldn't hit a target from 10 feet away. He was studying me like I was some kind of puzzle he couldn't solve. What happened to you out there? I could have told him about the midnight study sessions, the fundamental breakthrough, the moment everything clicked into place. Instead, I kept it simple. I learned to stop fighting the weapon and start working with it. He nodded absently, then seemed to remember where we were. Right. Well, welcome to the Advanced Marksmanship Unit, I guess. He gestured toward a chair. Sit down. We need to discuss your assignment. This isn't basic training anymore, Tyler. The soldiers who come through here are already expert marksmen. They're training for specialized roles. Snipers, designated marksmen, competitive shooting teams. The standards are higher than I'm used to. I understand. Do you? Marcus leaned forward, his expression growing serious. Tyler, I'm glad you made it through basic training. Really, I am. But this unit maintains the highest shooting standards in the Army. Our minimum qualification score is 350 out of 400. Most of our students score 370 or higher. If you're here because someone pulled strings, if this is some kind of family favor, it's not. I reached into my service record folder and pulled out my basic training qualification scores, sliding them across his desk. My final qualification was 387 out of 400. Quote, Marcus stared at the document for a long moment, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been impressive. 387? Tyler, that's expert marksman level. Yes, it is. But how? 3 years ago, you couldn't hit a barn from the inside. I watched you miss an entire target from 20 feet away. People change, Marcus. People improve. He was quiet for several minutes, studying my qualification scores like they were written in a foreign language. Finally, he looked up. Okay. Let's say these scores are legitimate. Let's say you really did qualify as an expert marksman. That was 3 months ago, using basic training weapons under controlled conditions. This is different. Here, we use precision rifles, custom ammunition, variable conditions, targets at distances you've never attempted. I waited, knowing he wasn't finished. Your first assignment will be with Alpha Group, our advanced distance shooting program. You'll be working with Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, our senior instructor for long-range precision. She's trained some of the best snipers in the Army, and she doesn't tolerate anything less than perfection. Marcus paused, his expression softening slightly. Tyler, I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm trying to prepare you. The failure rate in Alpha Group is 60%, and those are soldiers who come in with years of experience. What's the longest shot they'll expect me to make? 800 meters to start, eventually up to 1,200 meters under field conditions. I nodded, doing quick mental calculations. 1,200 meters was nearly 3/4 of a mile. At that distance, factors like wind speed, humidity, and even the rotation of the Earth could affect bullet trajectory. It was exponentially more complex than anything I'd attempted in basic training. When do I start? Marcus studied my face, searching for signs of doubt or fear. Finding none, he sighed and pulled out a training schedule. Monday morning, 0600. Building 852, Range 7. Sergeant Walsh will evaluate your current skill level and determine if you're capable of advanced training. He paused, then added quietly, Tyler, I hope you understand that I can't show you any special treatment. If anything, I'll probably be harder on you than the other instructors would be. I wouldn't expect anything else. We spent the next hour reviewing unit policies, safety protocols, and training expectations. Marcus was thorough and professional, but I could sense the underlying tension. His little brother, the family disappointment who couldn't make a free throw or hit a target, was now assigned to his elite unit, claiming qualification scores that bordered on remarkable. As I prepared to leave his office, Marcus called my name. Tyler. He stood up, his expression uncertain. I want you to know that I'm proud of you for completing basic training. Whatever happened out there, whatever changed, you proved me wrong about your determination. He paused. But this is different. This is my unit, my reputation, my responsibility. I won't compromise our standards, even for my family. I wouldn't ask you to. Good. He extended his hand and I shook it firmly. Welcome to Fort Braxton, soldier. I spent the rest of the day processing paperwork, receiving equipment assignments, and touring the base facilities. The advanced marksmanship unit was impressive. Climate-controlled storage for precision weapons, computer simulators that could replicate shooting conditions from around the world, and ranges that extended far beyond anything I'd seen in basic training. That evening, I called home to let our parents know I'd arrived safely. My father was thrilled to hear that I'd been assigned to Marcus's unit, seeing it as validation of the Sullivan family military tradition. My mother worried about the two of us working together, remembering childhood conflicts that had sometimes required parental intervention. But as I settled into my new barracks that night, I wasn't thinking about family dynamics or past conflicts. I was thinking about Monday morning, about Staff Sergeant Walsh's evaluation, about 800-meter targets that would test everything I'd learned about precision shooting. Marcus expected me to fail. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. He'd seen my old scores, remembered my limitations, and couldn't quite believe that 3 months of basic training had transformed his incompetent little brother into a capable marksman. Monday morning would be my chance to show him just how wrong he was. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh stood 5 feet 4 inches tall and looked like she could bench press a small car. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it could have been installed with industrial equipment, and her pale blue eyes had the intensity of a laser rangefinder. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 15 years turning average soldiers into precision killing machines. "Sullivan," she said, reading from my service record without looking up. "Expert marksman qualification from basic training. 387 out of 400. She finally raised her eyes to meet mine. Impressive numbers for a recruit. Now let's see if they mean anything in the real world. Range 7 was unlike anything I'd encountered before. Instead of the standard 100-meter lanes from basic training, this facility stretched nearly 2,000 meters into the distance, with targets positioned at various intervals across rolling terrain. Wind flags fluttered at regular intervals, providing real-time atmospheric data. Electronic sensors monitored temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure, feeding information to ballistic computers that could calculate trajectory adjustments down to the millimeter. Your basic training used standard M16 rifles with iron sights, Walsh explained as we walked toward the firing line. Today, you'll be working with this. She gestured toward a rifle that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. The weapon was a custom-built precision rifle chambered in .308 Winchester, equipped with a high-powered scope, adjustable bipod, and muzzle brake designed to reduce recoil and flash signature. It weighed nearly twice as much as anything I'd used before, and every component had been precision machined to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. This is the M24 sniper weapon system, Walsh continued. Effective range extends beyond 800 meters in capable hands. Today, we'll start you at 400 meters and work our way out, assuming you can hit anything at that distance. 4 other soldiers were already positioned along the firing line, each working with their own precision rifles under the supervision of additional instructors. I recognized the concentration on their faces. The same focused intensity I'd developed during my transformation in basic training, but amplified by the complexity of long-range shooting. Walsh handed me a magazine containing 5 rounds of match-grade ammunition. These cartridges cost more per round than most soldiers make in an hour. Each bullet is hand-selected for weight consistency. Powder charges are measured to the 10th of a grain, and overall length is controlled to within .003 inches. Don't waste them, quote. I loaded the magazine and chambered a round, feeling the smooth action of the precision rifle. The bolt closed with a satisfying click that spoke of Swiss watch tolerances and German engineering. Through the scope, the 400-meter target appeared close enough to touch, its black silhouette crisp and clear against the white backing. First shot is a zero confirmation, Walsh explained. I need to see where your natural point of aim intersects with the rifle's mechanical zero. Don't adjust anything. Just shoot exactly where the crosshairs settle naturally. I settled into a prone position behind the rifle, adjusting the bipod legs until the weapon sat level and stable. The fundamentals were the same as basic training: grip, stance, sight alignment, breathing, trigger control. But everything was magnified by the precision of the equipment and the distance to the target. Through the scope, I could see individual details on the target that would have been invisible at 400 meters with iron sights. The black silhouette was divided into scoring rings, with the innermost circle representing a perfect 10-point shot. Miss that center ring by even a few inches, and the score would drop dramatically. I began my breathing cycle, feeling my heart rate slow as the crosshairs settled onto the target. The natural respiratory pause arrived, and I applied steady pressure to the trigger, letting the shot break without anticipation or jerking. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. Through the scope, I watched the bullet impact exactly where the crosshairs had been aimed, dead center of the target, punching through the 10 ring with room to spare. Bullseye, called the range officer monitoring the electronic scoring system, 10.2 out of 10. Walsh raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. One good shot could be luck, and we both knew it. The second shot impacted 2 inches to the right of the first, still well within the 10 ring. The third shot grouped with the first 2, creating a triangle of holes that could be covered with a quarter. By the fourth shot, even the other instructors had stopped their own training to watch. "Ceasefire," Walsh called after my 5th round impacted the target. "Let's see what we're working with." We walked the 400 meters to the target in silence, boots crunching on gravel as morning dew evaporated in the rising sun. When we reached the target frame, Walsh pulled out a measuring device and began calculating group size. All 5 shots had impacted within a 2-inch circle, with 4 of them touching each other in the center of the 10 ring. For a first attempt at long-range precision shooting, using an unfamiliar rifle and dealing with atmospheric conditions I'd never encountered, it was an exceptional group. 2.1 inches at 400 meters, Walsh announced, her voice carefully neutral. That translates to approximately half a minute of angle. For comparison, most soldiers struggle to achieve 4-inch groups at this distance after weeks of training. We walked back to the firing line, where Walsh had set up targets at 600 meters. The silhouettes looked impossibly small through the scope, black dots against the distant hillside that seemed to dance in the heat shimmer rising from the ground. At this distance, environmental factors become critical, she explained. Wind speed and direction, temperature gradients, even the angle of the sun can affect bullet trajectory. Your basic training didn't prepare you for these variables. She was right. At 600 meters, the bullet would be in flight for nearly a full second, traveling through layers of air with different temperatures and wind speeds. A 5-mile-per-hour crosswind could push the bullet several inches off target, turning a perfect shot into a complete miss. But as I settled behind the rifle and acquired my sight picture, the fundamentals remained the same. The scope's reticle included reference marks for estimating wind speed and holdover points for various distances. I studied the wind flags between my position and the target, noting that the breeze was coming from the left at approximately 7 miles per hour. The first shot at 600 meters felt identical to the shots at 400. Smooth trigger break, clean recoil, perfect follow-through. Through the scope, I watched the bullet impact slightly left of center, compensating for wind drift that I'd slightly underestimated. 9.7, called the range officer. Excellent shot. I adjusted my hold point for the second shot, accounting for the wind pattern I'd observed. This bullet impacted the dead center. 10.0. By the end of the 600-meter session, I'd fired another exceptional group, with 4 out of 5 shots scoring 9.8 or better. Walsh was no longer trying to hide her surprise, and I noticed that Marcus had appeared at the range, watching from a distance with his arms crossed and an unreadable expression on his face. "One more distance," Walsh said, leading me toward the 800-meter line. "This is where we separate the shooters from the snipers. At this range, everything has to be perfect. Your fundamentals, your equipment, your environmental reading, even your mental state. Most soldiers can't achieve consistent accuracy beyond 600 meters. The 800-meter targets were barely visible as black specks against the hillside. Even through the high-powered scope, they appeared smaller than the iron sight targets I'd used in basic training. This was truly long-range precision shooting, the kind of skill that separated elite marksmen from ordinary soldiers. As I prepared for my final test, I could feel Marcus watching from behind the safety line. This wasn't just about proving myself to Staff Sergeant Walsh, or earning a place in the advanced marksmanship unit. This was about showing my big brother that Tyler Sullivan had evolved far beyond the family disappointment he remembered. The 800-meter target looked like a pinhead through the scope, wavering slightly in the morning heat. I could feel Walsh beside me, clipboard in hand, ready to document what she clearly expected to be my first real failure. Behind us, Marcus had moved closer to the firing line, close enough that I could hear his breathing. "Sullivan," Walsh said quietly, "at this distance, the margin for error is essentially 0. Bullet drop is approximately 32 inches, requiring precise elevation adjustment. Wind drift can push your shot 6 inches or more off target. Most importantly, at 800 meters, any flaw in your fundamentals will be magnified exponentially." I nodded, checking the wind flags one final time. The breeze had shifted to a quartering wind from the right, approximately 8 miles per hour with occasional gusts. The scope's ballistic reticle showed the holdover point I needed, but calculating wind drift at this distance required experience I'd never had the chance to develop. "Take your time," Walsh continued. "You have 5 rounds to prove you belong in this program." I settled into position behind the rifle, feeling the familiar weight of precision equipment. Through the scope, I could see other instructors gathering behind the safety line, drawn by word that the new recruit, Marcus Sullivan's little brother, was attempting the 800-meter qualification on his first day. The fundamental sequence began automatically: grip, stance, sight alignment, breathing. But at this distance, everything had to be perfect. A slight cant in the rifle could throw the shot several inches off target. Inconsistent cheek weld would affect scope alignment. Even my heartbeat could influence the shot if I didn't time the trigger brake correctly. I acquired my sight picture, holding slightly right of center to compensate for wind drift. The crosshairs settled onto my chosen aim point, and I began my breathing cycle. Inhale, exhale halfway, natural respiratory pause. The trigger broke clean and smooth, exactly like thousands of practice shots before. Through the scope, I watched the bullets trace, a faint shimmer in the air as the projectile flew downrange for what felt like an eternity. Impact. 9.4, called the range officer. Solid hit. Not perfect, but respectable for a first attempt at extreme range. I worked the bolt, ejecting the spent case and chambering a fresh round. The second shot felt better, my wind reading more confident based on the first bullet's impact. 9.8. The third shot, 10.0. Perfect score at 800 meters. I heard murmuring from the group of instructors behind us. Walsh was scribbling notes on her clipboard, but her expression had shifted from skeptical evaluation to focused attention. This wasn't beginner's luck anymore. This was consistent precision at a distance that challenged experienced marksmen. Fourth shot, 9.9. Fifth shot, 10.0. "Cease fire," Walsh announced, her voice carefully controlled. "Let's verify these targets." The walk to 800 meters took nearly 10 minutes across uneven terrain. As we approached the target frame, I could see the cluster of bullet holes. 5 impacts grouped within a circle that could be covered by a silver dollar. At this distance, with atmospheric conditions I'd never trained for, using a rifle I'd fired for the first time 30 minutes earlier, it was an extraordinary performance. Walsh measured the group size with scientific precision. 4.3 inches at 800 meters, she announced. That's approximately half a minute of angle. She looked up from her measuring device, studying my face like I was some kind of puzzle. "Sullivan, how long have you been shooting precision rifles?" "Today is my first time, Sergeant." "Today is your first time," she repeated slowly. "You've never worked with ballistic computers? Never calculated wind drift at extended range? Never dealt with bullet drop compensation beyond basic training distances?" "That's correct, Sergeant." She was quiet for a long moment, looking between the target and her notes. "In 15 years of advanced marksmanship instruction, I have never seen a soldier achieve sub-minute accuracy at 800 meters on their first attempt." "Never." We walked back to the firing line, where the crowd of observers had grown larger. Word was spreading across the base that something unusual was happening at Range 7. Even some of the competitive shooting team members had appeared, drawn by reports of exceptional marksmanship from an unknown recruit. Marcus stepped forward as we approached the firing line. His expression was unreadable, but I could see tension in his posture that hadn't been there earlier. "Staff Sergeant Walsh," he said formally, "what's the evaluation outcome?" Walsh consulted her clipboard. "Your brother has demonstrated exceptional natural ability with precision rifles. His performance at all 3 distances, 400, 600, and 800 meters, exceeds the qualification standards for advanced training." "What about the 1,000-meter range?" The question came from Captain Thompson, the unit's commanding officer, who had apparently arrived during my 800-meter session. "If he's performing this well at 800, I'd like to see what he can do at true long range." Walsh hesitated. "Sir, the 1,000-meter qualification is typically reserved for soldiers who have completed several weeks of advanced training. The environmental factors at that distance—" "I understand the challenges, Sergeant. But if this soldier is demonstrating the kind of natural ability you're describing, I think we should find out exactly what his capabilities are. Marcus stepped closer to his commanding officer. Sir, with respect, Private Sullivan has been at this unit for exactly 4 hours. Perhaps we should allow him to complete the standard progression before attempting. Are you questioning my judgment, Staff Sergeant Sullivan? No, sir. Of course not. Captain Thompson turned his attention to me. Private Sullivan, are you willing to attempt the 1,000-meter qualification? Quote, the 1,000-meter range represented the absolute pinnacle of precision rifle shooting. At that distance, bullets dropped over 6 feet from the muzzle, wind drift could exceed a foot in moderate conditions, and factors like humidity and altitude became critical variables. It was a distance that challenged even the most experienced snipers. Yes, sir, I'm willing to try. Outstanding. Staff Sergeant Walsh, please prepare the 1,000-meter range for qualification shooting. As the range setup continued, Marcus pulled me aside, away from the growing crowd of observers. Tyler, you need to understand what you're getting into, he said quietly. The 1,000-meter range isn't just a longer shot, it's exponentially more difficult. Captain Thompson has a reputation for pushing soldiers beyond their limits, sometimes to the point of failure. If you miss these shots, if you can't perform at this level, it could affect your entire career trajectory. Are you trying to protect me or protect yourself? The question hit harder than I'd intended. Marcus's expression shifted, and for a moment I saw something vulnerable in his eyes. Both, maybe, he admitted. Tyler, what you've accomplished today is remarkable. It's beyond remarkable. It's unprecedented. But there's a difference between exceptional performance and setting records. The base record for 1,000-meter precision shooting has stood for 20 years. It was set by Master Sergeant Rodriguez, one of the finest marksmen in Army history. His group size was 3.2 inches at 1,000 meters. What happened to him? He retired last year. The record still stands because nobody has been able to match it, despite dozens of attempts by some of the best shooters in the military. I understood what Marcus was really saying. This wasn't just about proving my abilities anymore. This was about potentially surpassing the achievement of a legendary marksman on my first day of advanced training, in front of witnesses who would remember this moment for the rest of their careers. Marcus, I said quietly, 3 months ago you told everyone I'd never make it past basic training. Today, I'm standing here having qualified expert marksmen at every distance Staff Sergeant Walsh has tested. Maybe it's time to stop underestimating what I can accomplish. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right, you've earned the chance to try. Quote, at the 1,000-meter firing line, Captain Thompson was waiting with a stopwatch and what appeared to be the base's entire advanced marksmanship staff. Word had spread beyond the unit. I could see soldiers from other companies gathering at the observation area, drawn by rumors of record-breaking marksmanship. Staff Sergeant Walsh handed me a fresh magazine containing 5 rounds of specially selected match ammunition. These are the most precise cartridges we have, she explained. Hand-loaded by our competition team, sorted for weight, and measured for concentricity. At 1,000 meters, equipment precision becomes as important as shooter skill. Through the scope, the 1,000-meter target was barely visible as a dark speck against the hillside. Even at maximum magnification, it appeared smaller than anything I'd ever attempted to hit. The wind flags between my position and the target showed varying conditions. Light breeze near the firing line, stronger gusts at mid-range, and different patterns entirely at the target end. I settled behind the rifle, running through my pre-shot routine with methodical precision. But this time, everything felt different. The weight of expectation, the crowd of observers, the knowledge that I was attempting something that had challenged the Army's best marksmen for 2 decades. As I acquired my sight picture and began my breathing cycle, one thought cut through all the noise and pressure. Tyler Sullivan, the failed soldier who couldn't hit a barn from the inside, was about to attempt a shot that would either validate everything he'd worked for or confirm every doubt that had ever been raised about his abilities. The crosshairs settled onto my chosen aim point, 6 feet above the actual target to compensate for bullet drop. I held slightly left of center, accounting for the complex wind pattern I'd observed. My finger found the trigger, applying steady pressure as I entered the natural respiratory pause. The rifle fired. Through the scope, I watched the bullet's long arc through multiple wind layers, its path influenced by atmospheric conditions. I was reading more through instinct than experience. For nearly 2 seconds, the projectile flew through space toward a target that represented 20 years of unchallenged excellence. When the electronic scoring system registered the impact, the number that appeared on the display made the entire range fall silent, 10.0. Perfect score at 1,000 meters. But that was only the first shot. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.